Hi, I'm Annalee, and this is my YouTube knitting journal. My name is Annalee, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I have 3 large dogs, 2 teenage children, and 1 handsome Latino husband. Today, instead of giving an update on all of the knitting projects that I am working on currently, I'm only going to talk about one of them. And that's because I kind of have a lot to say about it. I'm trying to work out some kinks and figure out some modifications to make the design work for me. Before I show what I have so far, I will just say that this is a pullover sweater called Camaro, and the designer is Annalee. It's written for DK weight yarn, and that is what I'm using. I'm using some yarn that I got from Knit Picks. It's called City Tweed DK. It's a blend of wool and alpaca, and then there's also some percentage of the content is the little tweedy bits in the yarn. So it's a really cute pattern. I've had my eye on it for literally years. I looked back and realized that I bought that pattern in 2018. So I've had that pattern saved on my computer for several years. I actually bought the yarn at the same time, so I've had the yarn sitting in my stash for almost 5 years, and I just haven't gotten around to starting that project. It's so easy to get distracted by other new projects that come out and always wanting to do something new and different. But I finally started this project, and I'm excited to have it. It's fairly popular. I've seen lots of versions of it. There's hundreds of projects on Ravelry. And the designer is someone that's been on my radar for a while. Annalee of Tannis Fiber Arts. She also sells yarn, and I've never used any of her yarn, but I have made at least one of her patterns in the past. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I have so far of the Camaro. It's not a complete sweater, but I want to try on what I have so far. Prop myself up a bit here so it can be seen better. So it's cute, right? So it's got this really distinct chevron design. What you do is you just make this shape using increases. So you increase on either side of a center stitch here. And as it gets more and more stitches, it makes this V shape. And then there's additional increases to just shape the yoke to fit your body. And they're not traditional raglan style increases. They all fall along distinct lines, but there are actually 6 lines where you're doing increases. So one on either shoulder, and then a few lines in the back where you're working increases. Now, this part of the sweater that you can see, it fits me pretty well, and I think it's pretty cute. One thing about this pattern, though, if you look at the schematic, is that there is one measurement given for the bust, and then the measurement given around the waist or hips, depending on how long you choose to make the sweater, is several inches larger. So that means it has a bit of an A-line shape. And the reason for that is because the distance that gets covered by X number of stitches that you have, say right here before you split for sleeves, as you go all the way down to the point and then back up to the other shoulder, That is a longer distance than if you had those same number of stitches just going straight. But on the lower portion of the sweater, that's exactly what you have. You have the same number of stitches as you have when you first split for the sleeves. You have that same number of stitches along the bottom. In the meantime, there are short rows that are done back and forth to kind of fill in this triangle around the last chevron stripe, but you're not reducing any more stitches in here. So it ends up quite a bit wider at the bottom half of the sweater than around the bust. And then in addition to that, there's the same number of stitches on the back and on the front. But on the back, the stripes are going straight around. And on the front, again, those stitches are traveling a longer distance because it's going all the way down to the point and then back up at the shoulder. So even on the top portion of the sweater, I think the front fits me nicely. I like the way it fits around the bust. But I find that it's rather gapey in the back. So there's all this extra fabric in the back while the front sits nicely. So these are some things about the sweater that, as I, tried on my partially made sweater, I'm not loving. I looked at a lot of the patterns in Ravelry, the projects in Ravelry to see what comments other people had about this pattern. The pattern is available in a huge range of sizes, and there are examples of this sweater being shown on many different body types. And so that's always really nice to see and really helpful to try to see how the project might fit your own body type. And the designer, she's quite a thin, petite woman. And the sample pictures in the pattern, you don't really see these issues that I'm experiencing here. And I suspect it could potentially be because of her body type. She is quite thin and petite, and so maybe it's not as exaggerated on her, the fact that it's tighter around the bust and then looser and lots of fabric on the back. You can definitely see it on some of the other projects. So I went through quite a few of the projects, and you can see that, yeah, it's more fitted in the front for a lot of people and then gapier in the back. And then there were quite a few projects that mentioned in the notes that they made some modifications. They basically put fewer stitches across the back than across the front. And that makes sense to me, because in order for it to measure the same across the front and across the back, you're going to need a different number of stitches, because in the front it's traveling, that row of stitches is traveling a longer distance than it's traveling across the back. I did even take a tape measure, and I measured the width across the front and then measured the width across the back, and it's about 3 or 4 inches wider across the back than across the front, which, I mean, at least for my body, the front is bigger than the back. So I thought for a while about what I was going to do to try to fix this, to make it fit me in a way that I find more pleasing. And I decided I'm going to just start over. I have a 50-gram ball of each of the stripe colors that you see here. And so, I certainly am not using an entire 50 grams for each stripe. And I thought I'll probably have plenty of leftover yarn, I'm just going to start a new one and try to work out some modifications, make fewer stitches across the back than on the front, and then when I get to the underarms, continue doing some decreases as I'm doing the short rows to try to take out some of that additional width so that it's as narrow or narrower at the waist as at the bust, and it doesn't have that kind of A-line shape that I just don't really love myself. I thought it might be possible to kind of finish this one off and give it to someone to use as a maternity sweater, because the shape of it would kind of be perfect for that. Here, let me put it back on. Where it's kind of fitted here, and then look at all of this extra room. It gets so much wider at the waist. And I thought that would be kind of cool. One of my sisters right now is actually pregnant, but I don't think she's going to be pregnant long enough that she would still be pregnant when, if and when I were to finish this project. The issue, though, is still that the back is wider than the front. And so I feel like the sleeves aren't placed at the optimal position. So I still would like, I mean, still around the sleeves, it's a little bit awkward, even though you can kind of stretch it and have, you know, potentially extra room for a pregnant belly under there. So, yeah, so I kind of just put this one aside and I started over. So here is the beginning of version 2 of my Camaro sweater. You know, one thing I didn't mention yet is that in the pattern, there is no ribbing around the neck. The pattern instructs you to just cast on and then start knitting. And stockinette loves to roll. Probably if you had the right type of yarn and it was fitted right and blocked right, you wouldn't really see that roll. And you don't see it very much in the designer's sample, but in lots of the other projects on Ravelry, you could tell that it was rolling at the neck in a way that I didn't care for. So I actually put ribbing around the neck, and that prevents it from rolling. I did the same thing on my second version, but I made the ribbing, I did 2 by 2 instead of 1 by 1, and I made the ribbing a little bit wider. I made the ribbing the entire width of that first stripe instead of having the first stripe be like half ribbing and then half stockinette. So that was the first thing that I did differently. And then I decided to place my increases a little bit differently. Instead of having 6 increase lines in addition to the chevron, the diagonal in the front, I only have 4. And they're a little bit closer to like a traditional raglan increase. Now this one is right now coming up much higher on my neck, and I think that's in large part because I don't have more of a sweater to kind of pull it down. So I have not yet gotten to the part where I need to split the sleeves, but I'm really liking the way that this looks so far. And I did some just calculations to figure out how many stitches I need across the back versus across the front, where it's going diagonal and then back up to the shoulder, and have them be the same width. Roughly the same width. So that is my plan. I am going to do more stitches on the front than across the back. I've got not too many more rows until I'm going to split for the sleeves. And then once I'm doing the short rows to fill in the kind of triangle area on the side of the diagonal, I'm going to continue doing some decreases down the sides to make it so it doesn't flare out at the waist and hips, but rather is more straight. That is my plan. So, in spite of the fact that I have had 2 separate starts to this project, it is going rather quickly. It's knitting up pretty quickly, and I really like this yarn a heck of a lot. I think it's beautiful and it's drapey, probably because of that alpaca content. I think I would absolutely use this yarn again. I think so far my favorite color has been this blue color. It almost has kind of a dark grayish black undertone that I quite like. I actually probably would have made some more progress on this, except that it turns out I didn't have quite enough of the 50-gram ball of yarn left after doing my first version to finish the red stripe on the second version. So I ran out of yarn. This is the end of it, and I have this much more on the last round of red before I would have gotten to the beginning of the round. Well, I guess that's backwards. So if I literally had about 12 to 18 inches more of this red yarn, I would have been able to make it. But I ran out, and that means that I'm clearly not going to have enough left over of the pink or the white to finish the last 2 stripes like on the first attempt. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to frog this entire first attempt. I'm not going to make it into a maternity top, although it is kind of a cute idea for a maternity top. Maybe at some point in the future, if a loved one of mine is expecting and needs a beautiful sweater to fit over their pregnant belly, maybe I will attempt this design again. I would adjust and make the back not wider than the front. But this guy is going to get entirely frogged, and that way I can salvage, the 18 inches of red yarn that I need. So that is my plan. That is where I'm at with this. It's gonna be beautiful when it's made. I plan on making mine a little bit cropped. There are instructions in the pattern for making it either cropped or like a longer tunic length. There are instructions for making it either a 3/4 sleeve or a full length sleeve. I will likely do the 3/4 length sleeve. And once I recover the yarn that I need, I expect that it's going to go pretty quickly. I will continue to try it on as I go and make sure that I'm addressing all of the issues that I had in the first version. And I will be back to show the final product, hopefully in a week or so when it's all done. Thanks so much for being here with me. It's really fun to talk about my knitting, which is a hobby that I am extremely passionate about. I really just like to document it for myself, but it's also been a fun way for me to connect with other knitters that are out there. So I will be back soon and show you how these planned modifications worked out. Until then, bye.